Okay, I'd like to thank Mark for the invitation to speak. I'm going to talk this morning about practice, about the work I do outside of my teaching, but it's very much work that informs my teaching. I'll say a little bit about something I'm not really going to talk about, even though I've written 2 books about them, not peer-reviewed. Because I think sometimes there's a view that, covers are not really so important, particularly dust jackets. And, for me, the cover tells us much about the publisher's aspirations for the author. It tells us something about the visual sensibilities about the time of publication, of the relationship of design and marketing in the publishing house, and hopefully it also suggests something of the book's content and it attracts readers. But I'm not going to talk about that. The inside of the book also does some of those things to slightly different degree and with slightly different aims. I just thought I'd mention a couple of subconscious influences on me when I was, I suppose, a teenager. And 2 things I vividly remember, long before I knew what graphic design was, I would say. Wainwright's Guides to the Lakeland Fells, which are very much a personal vision of the author, who's also an illustrator, and a perfect marriage of form and content, and well suited to their purpose. And also the particular example, which isn't here, is the HMSO publication about historical monuments in Westmoreland, a very self-effacing typography, whose look was independent of the specific content, but the typographic details were such that all functions could clearly be articulated to the reader. This particular example is instead Schmoller's typography for Buildings of England. What's important to me, and always has been as a designer, is an idea of the primacy of the word. And when I was at college, I developed that through a lot of experimental letterpress work. And in these pieces, the look is very much to the fore, and the look is very much informed by a particular series of exhibitions about medieval manuscripts that were happening in London in the early to mid-1980s. This was my letterpress set and printed thesis, or a page from it. And again, the look is very much to the fore, in this case, a medieval manuscript lying over the top of Gutenberg's 42-line Bible. And the physical form becomes an overt illustration of the text. And one last example, sort of showing a fascination with the primacy of the word, working with the meaning of a text, in this case a short poem by Samuel Beckett. There is a sense in which I think books design themselves. And by that I mean, if you pay attention to the needs of the material, they actually do suggest answers. You don't really need to do much to it. And generally in briefings and so on, I tend to say very little and just listen. I might actually know exactly what I'm going to do very quickly, but I obviously never say. This is a book I wrote and designed with Catherine Dixon some years ago now, Signs, Lettering in the Environment. And we'd been photographing examples of this, including manholes, for many, many years. Everything was shot on 35mm film, and the format of 35mm is such that 6 pictures horizontally occupy exactly the same area as 6 images vertically. So it was very easy to construct the book. We then needed some space for the captions. The caption grid has nothing to do with 2 or 3 columns above. It's 5 columns. It gives us a variety of picture sizes, and occasionally we'll have a full page image where we will actually crop. So in that sense, the book designs itself. And typography is a code reassuring the reader. And again, all I really mean there is that the reader should be under no doubt that this texture of text is main text, this other texture is footnote, and this different texture is caption. The reader shouldn't have to fight their way through things, finding out what anything is. The designer should do the hard work, and very often they don't. Again, implicit in that is choosing the right typeface with the right variety of weights and so on. So we might need 2 sets of figures, lining and non-lining. We might need 2 typefaces. We might need bolds, italics, small caps, all of those things. And we need them simply to help the reader. When we have what's presented as a complicated text, it might require a more complicated typography. In this case, a book by the artist Richard Lazelle, 36,000 words of autobiography, written in about 9 different voices, but in 2 main kinds, for a commentary on his life and then commentary on works themselves. So I used a 2 and a 3 column grid together, and you get pauses between, which are useful simply as pauses. They introduce white space, which helps the navigation of the book, the feel of the book, and it creates space for illustration. In many respects, I think typography is the glue that binds the book together. And principally, apart from this next example, I'm actually talking really about illustrated books here. So, as I say, the typography is a code, but it also holds it together. In a novel, there may be few places for grand typographic display, perhaps the title page. And designing this special edition in 2007 was quite interesting for me, because I'd designed the original hardback edition 20 years previously, and the brief for that time was, don't make it look like a book by a rock star. This time it was a more lavish production, a short run, 500 copies, better paper, larger format, and really the only intervention into the text was to differentiate between Euclid, the anti-hero, who speaks bold and range left, and the third-person narrator, who speaks justified. And the dividers become the only place then for typographic display. They also, when the type is used this large, highlight some of the peculiarities of this particular typeface. A calm divider in the middle of the book, and then it all goes horribly wrong at the end. In this case, it's red typography that is the glue that holds the book together, and an end paper and a title page. And it's good that the price of colour printing has come down and you can actually put colour anywhere these days. Sometimes I like to surprise people. Anne Talentire really isn't a glossy red artist, but somehow I persuaded her that her book cover for Project Press should be as such. And sometimes I think, quite a lot of the time, I think that actually the typography has to look like it needs to be. It shouldn't actually conform to a particular idea. So this is a relatively complicated set of contents for this book, and I've separated the 2 parts of the book. There are essays and there are works illustrated, and the works illustrated were important to Anne, but if I'd incorporated those into the main contents list, it would have appeared that specific essays were talking about specific pieces of work and given quite a false impression of the book. So this was the answer, even though it's a slightly odd-looking contents page. It's transparent typography. It talks about what's inside. In most of these books, it's a very tight collaboration between the author, the editor, and the designer. And that's really crucial, because you're telling a story in the book, and it's important that everyone has a part in that story. So when it works, it's really pleasing, exciting even. When it doesn't work, it's really disappointing. This is a book for the artist Alison Turnbull about an installation at a new development, 1 Vine Street in London. It was not having to be sold on bookstands, so it doesn't need a conventional working cover. But it takes you from Alison's sketch about the work on the outside into the building itself. The plan is on the front and back covers. You've entered the building, you're looking outside, back at the windows. And then there's an essay which talks about all the sources. And one of the really important things in designing an illustrated book for me is to keep text and image working together. So again, the reader shouldn't have to find the pictures that are being discussed. They are to hand. It sounds obvious, but I'm sure we all know examples where that's not the case. Here it was a relatively short text, so working with Kate Lyons, we decided that we would only put as much text on a spread as was actually needed to talk about the illustrations. So actually the essay doesn't look like an essay, it looks like a series of extended captions, but it is linear. It gives you just enough information. Sometimes not too much, sometimes very little. And then every so often you get deeper into the artwork with more pictures, full page bleed, taking you through the building, through the different aspects of the work. And towards the end, a series of process shots. Working with, an old friend, Julia Mackenzie, as editor at Thames and Hudson. She knew I was familiar with Alan Aldridge's work from his time at Penguin and asked me to come and work on this book. And in some ways it was really exciting, in other ways it was really depressing. Alan has an amazing quantity of work, an amazing back catalogue, which he showed us with 80 CDs of largely unmarked images, many of which were in a lockup in North London. He was in LA, and he wouldn't give us the keys to the lockup. It's really frustrating, and there's an amazing story to tell about Alan Aldridge. And I'm quite pleased with what we did in the book, but this isn't the really amazing story because he was just so bloody difficult. To illustrate early work, Julia was borrowing books from the London Library and we were photographing them. I was even buying things on eBay, which was deeply dissatisfying. So I kind of don't feel he deserved the book he got. We actually ghost wrote quite big chunks of this book. It wouldn't have worked otherwise. This is a more complicated book, which I can best explain with a short video, which occasionally crashes, so we'll see what happens. So this was for the artist Anne Bean. It was published by Matt's Gallery, and originally she had wanted a book within a book. And putting a small book inside a larger book is quite difficult to bind and gives you a sort of dissatisfying spine and so on. And simultaneously between meetings, we'd suddenly realised that we could actually print a small book within a big book and simply perforate it and leave it to the viewer to punch out and see it. So the 3 little essays about Anne's work occupy this small little space, the centre 4 of every 8-page section in the first 48 pages. When the little book is there, the folios and the running heads are on the little book. When it's not there, they're on the main page. Anne's captioning for her own works are at the top and the bottom of the page, large. And obviously when the little book's in the way, it can't all fit. So the bit of the caption that's hidden can only be revealed when you tear out the little book. Have you got that? And there is a really strict grid, so Anne's writing is always large. It's at the top or at the bottom. And she was a bit surprised I'd made it that large. And I just said, well, it really needs a completely different voice to the essays. And I like your writing. So that encouraged her to actually write more, which I think really helps the book. So it's kind of perverse, it's kind of odd, but it suits Anne Bean's work right down to the ground. And so it goes on through the first half. So I'm going to pedantically tear this page out as well. I don't really know how many people punched out their 48 pages, to be honest. I think some people were really shy about doing that. But it's relatively easy. So the gallery did have a little group of interns who tore out the first... who on the opening night would tear out pages for you so they didn't damage, and they were quite versed in this. There's a little bit of playfulness. The caption on that previous one just cuts right across the spread. There are some handmade bits in the middle. And then there was a spread that we really loved when it was in the first half of the book. And I'm trying to find it, and it's there. But it got moved to the end of the book. It made more sense, but we just made artifice of that fact at the very end. So there's 2 little sets now on sort of themes and variations. And this is a series of books for the Goethe Institute from, I suppose, the mid to late 1990s. And I think this is where I sort of developed some sympathy for modernism. Only a certain amount. Sorry, I've only got 1 copy of this, and my daughter at the time coloured it in. Sorry, she's still my daughter. I didn't phrase that sentence very well. But the essay in here... Oh, dear. The essay in here was called 10 Words for Rainer Ruttenbeck. So just a simple device, each word... each paragraph springs off the length of that word. These books are A5 in size, which is a little wide for going full measure. So this was a way of using less of the page. 2 typefaces which swap in the German part of the book. Imke Nöbel. Again, just trying to use the whole page, but not the whole page for the type. And the only thing that really ties the books together is that colour panel on the front, a constant leading, which is 5mm in each book, and a sensibility. But there's nothing else that is fixed. For the Bloomers and their fascination with trees and verticalities, the narrow column became more applicable. And for Droese, with his sharply cut paperworks, quite a jagged text, but it's simply main text running down 2/3 of the page with quoted matter pushed to the right, footnotes positioned at the foot, and captions aligned against the image. And a final set of theme and variations with just a few observations about detail, really. and the role that plays in creating a more rounded product, to use a word I don't really like. A series of books that we call the White Books for Matt's Gallery. The first of which was in 2000, and we're now up to number 23 with a book on Willie Docherty's work that's about to appear. It took us about 3 books to establish that a common typography on the covers might be useful. But again, it's only the typography on the covers that is consistent. These books are given out free in the gallery with an exhibition, and they are whatever they need to be to suit what the artist has prepared, which sometimes is an essay, sometimes it's background visual material. We pay a lot of attention to paper stock, to how we reproduce images. So instead of a straight grayscale photograph maybe of a drawing, we'll maybe scan it and drop the background to white so the drawing is appearing on the printed page in a more natural kind of way. Just making things actual size, if they fit, can really help the feel of a book. And monochromatic images, we spend quite a lot of time getting just the right distressed look, which is quite difficult. Sometimes the artist does the typography and I just stick it in a file for the printers. One thing I do like with very large pieces of work is to somehow indicate scale. So this image on the left is actual size, or an actual size detail of a piece of work that was a 48 sheet etching. Subtle use, which you probably can't see, of the second colour of the duotone used in the title. An image I just happen to like. Really gloss art paper for some quite disgusting images, as in I didn't like them. Just things. So they really vary, and you know that's important. It's not about the gallery. The gallery is the container in which these things happen. So it's important that the inside should reflect what the artist wants and the work very much. Sometimes there is need for long essays with quite carefully handled typography. Again, a full-size detail. More sort of well-detailed typography, going right back to those things that I sort of grew up with. And I think when I went through college, we didn't really know how to justify, because you gave typesetting to somebody else and they did it on their machinery. And I suspect a lot of designers don't like to justify type simply because they don't really know how to control the H and J's. But this particular book was sort of me almost forcing myself to learn how to do that properly. Again, little details. These are dotted rules round pieces of work rather than solid rules. They help to create a feel of a much older book, and they tie in very much with the typography of the artwork that's being reproduced. Sometimes we play games. The paper in this book is actually really opaque. There is no show-through. It's an entirely different image on the other side. But the show-through of the original also didn't reproduce in the photograph, so we faked it to confuse people. And there's an awful lot of working hard with printers, artists, gallery owners to make this work, because it really is collaborative. Thank you.